In this tutorial, you will learn how to create custom blocks in ClassiCube. Custom blocks are basically any blocks that are not part of the standard block set. Anything from stone all the way up until stone brick. These are all the standard blocks that you will see on pretty much across all of ClassiCube. However, on some servers you might also see over blocks below here. So anything below stone brick, these are all blocks that I added myself, so these are all custom blocks. And in this tutorial I will show you how to create them. And you can use custom blocks to create very unique blocks that allow you to make very unique builds, and they're very useful. For example, you can make round trees, you can make thinner wooden logs, you can make leaves on the ground, you can make pebbles like this, you can make door frames, lamps, stairs, glass panes, smaller bookshelves, you name it. There are almost an infinite amount of possibilities for custom blocks. I do want to mention that I am playing on a server that's running on the Galaxy server software, so I can't guarantee that the commands that I will be using in this video will work on servers that are running on a different server software, so keep that in mind. So there are actually 3 different commands that you can use to create custom blocks. However, you most likely will only have access to one of those on most servers. So you have /OSLB, and OS basically it's a subset of commands that allow you to edit map options only in your own map. They allow you to change the sky, the texture pack, you can add custom blocks, you can do a lot of different things. You know, the weather, the skybox, basically all of those aesthetic options it allows you to do in your own maps only. There's also a command called LB. It's very similar, except for the fact that if you have access to this command, you can modify blocks in any map on the server. So over people's maps as well as the public maps, so that's why you probably won't have access to this command on most servers. The last command is /GB, which stands for global block, and this one takes it a step further. Not only are you able to edit any blocks in any map, if you use this command to modify blocks, that block will appear in every single map on the server. There are some servers that have a bunch of custom blocks that will appear in every map, and it's very useful if you're creating a server. So I will be using the OSLB syntax, but if you want to create global blocks on your own server or level blocks, you can just use /LB or /GB. The rest of the commands are the exact same. So how do you start creating custom blocks? Since I am using /OSLB, I obviously need to create my own map first. So if you want to create your own map, you use /OS map add, and this will create a new map. And once you've done that, you can use /OS go to visit your own map. Now I already have my own map, so I'm just going to go to OS go 17, and this will bring me to this map right here. The way I'm going to go through this tutorial is by covering all of the different block properties one by one. You can view the list of all the block properties by using /OSLB edit, and what you're basically doing when you're creating custom blocks is you're editing a block's properties. So if you look in the list, you can see all these different properties, like a block's name is a property, its shape, the Blockslight. All of these different things are all properties of a block that you can modify. So I'm going to create a new block. So how do you create a new block? There are 2 ways to do it, and the first way, and the intended way, or the main way to do it, is by using /OSLB add. But what this will do is it will walk you through a sort of in-game chat tutorial where you will create a custom block step by step. And I think this tutorial is a bit incomplete because it does not cover all of the different options, and some of the explanations are a bit too short and a bit too confusing, I think, especially for new players. And it's also very impractical, it's very slow. If you're adding a lot of custom blocks, having to do this every single time it's really tedious and is unnecessary. The faster way to do it, and the more practical way to create custom blocks, is by copying an existing block, which will create a new block, but it will copy the properties of the block that you want to copy. So for example, if I were to copy stone, what would happen is I would create a new custom block, but it would have the same exact properties as stone. So the game would see them as two different blocks, they would just have the same exact properties. So let's do that. So to copy a block, what you want to do is you want to use /OSLB copy, and then you need to enter the block ID. And to find the block ID, you can open up the menu, hover over the block, and you can see its name, and you also see its ID. So stone has an ID of 1. So if you search OSLB copy and then press 1 and press enter, as you can see, we have created a new custom block, and what the game has done is it has applied all of the properties from the stone block, so that the same texture, the same shape, the same sound, same name, everything is the same, and it has applied it to the new custom block. So if you open up our menu, you can see that a new block has appeared in our menu, and this is our new custom block. So we have just created a new custom block right here. And as you can see, it looks exactly the same as stone. It kind of is. It behaves the exact same as stone. The only difference is that it has a different block ID, meaning it is technically a separate block from stone. If I put the regular stone block here, they look identical. You cannot tell them apart at all. So let's say you don't know which one of these is the copy and which one is the original stone block. What you can do is, if the block is placed down on the map somewhere, you can look at the block and you can click your scroll wheel, and what will happen is that the block will appear in your hotbar, and while it's in your hotbar and you're holding it, you can press B to open up your menu, and your mouse cursor will automatically hover over the block, which allows you to see the ID of the block immediately. This is very useful, and I use this all the time, so it's a very useful trick you can use. So if I do it here, I can see this one is the original stone block. If I click my scroll wheel on this one, I can see that this is the new copy that we just made. This is our new custom block right here. It might be weird seeing that our first custom block has an ID of 767. You'd expect, if you're creating a new block, that it would appear right here next to stone brick with an ID of 66, right? The game appends new blocks from the bottom up, so your first custom block is going to have an ID of 767 if there are no prior custom blocks already in our menu. So this means that you can have a total of 767 blocks, of which 65 of which are the standard blocks. Okay, that's a mouthful of information. Let's actually start editing our new custom block. So let's go back to our properties. So you can always bring up the property menu by using /OSLB edit, and you can see all of the different properties. Let's start by changing the name of the stone block. So to change the name, what you have to do is you just use OSLB edit, and you need to provide the ID of the block, which is 767. And now you need to enter the property that you want to change, name, and after this you want to enter a value for the property. If you don't know what to enter or how to enter it, you can just leave it like this, press enter, and the game will tell you what kind of values you can enter. So in this case, use the name for the block. So the value you want to enter after this is, well, the name that you want to give the block. So let's say I want to name it stone slab. Let's name it stone slab. And as you can see, the name for this custom block, so in this case stone, has been named to stone slab. So if you open our menu, we can see that our new custom block has the name stone slab. Our regular stone block is left untouched, by the way, so because we're not modifying the regular stone block, we're modifying purely this new custom block that we made, right? Because this one has the ID of 767. That is what we entered right here. So if we look in our property menu, we can see that we can also change its shape. Now what the shape is, there are basically two main shapes in ClassiCube. You have cubes and you have sprites. So anything like stone, like grass, cobblestone, dirt, these are all cubes. But slabs, snow, these are also cubes. You might think, well, they look different, but they are also in the same cube, sort of group as the rest. However, the second group of blocks are called sprites, and sprites are anything like fire, a rope is a sprite, the flowers and the mushrooms, these are all sprites. And how are they different? The first difference is that if you look from above, they all have this sort of X shape, so you can recognize them by that. Another difference between sprites and cubes is that the size of a sprite is determined by its texture. The size of a regular block is determined by its minimum and maximum coordinates, which I will get into later. So like I said, stone by default is a cube, right? So let's try changing this to a sprite and let's see what happens. Okay, so /OS, I'll be editing again. We're going to edit block 767 and we're going to change its shape. And let's see what kind of options we have. So like I said, we have cubes and we have sprites. If we type in 0, it would change it to a cube, which, well, nothing much would happen because it's already a cube. But if I type in 1, it'll change to a sprite. So let's see what happens. So if I type in 1, we get a sprite. And as you can see, we've just changed our stone block to a sprite. And it looks kind of weird, right? So it has this X shape, like I said, and it is a bit larger than most of the sprites, because if we open up our texture menu, you can do it by pressing F10. As you can see, our stone texture is, well, 16 pixels by 16 pixels. Like I said, the size of a sprite is determined by its texture, right? So the reason the stone sprite is bigger than the mushroom sprite is because the mushroom texture is a lot smaller, as you can see right here. Okay, let's look at our third option, that is Blockslight. So what does Blockslight? Blockslight is nothing more than a shadow. So if I put here, as you can see, the block casts a shadow. And most blocks in ClassiCube do cast a shadow, right? So your cobblestone casts a shadow, sand casts a shadow, water casts a shadow, but okay, mushrooms do not. TNT casts a shadow. Most blocks cast a shadow. However, you can turn that off. Or like, if you don't want a block to cast a shadow because it makes your builds look too dark or something, what you have to do is you have to type /OB edit. So there's the ID of the block and then Blockslight. You press enter. You can see if we enter yes, the block will cast a shadow. If we say no, it doesn't. So if I say no, as you can see, the shadow will disappear. So I can now place this block, and as you can see, there will be no shadow. If I put yes, as you can see, it will cast a shadow. So I think that's pretty straightforward as well. Let's move on to our next property, so Fullbright. So if you look closely, you can see that the stone block is a little bit darker on this side, right, than it is on the top, for example. If you type in /OB edit, block ID, and then Fullbright, if we say yes, it will be fully lit. No, it won't be. So if you say yes, as you can see, it becomes a lot brighter on all sides. It looks a bit different. So here we have our standard stone block, and here we have our Fullbright custom block, and they do look quite different like this. Alright, now we've arrived at the texture. So we have all textures, side texture, left texture, right texture, front, back, top, and bottom textures. So these are all options to change a block's texture. The game allows you to give a different texture to each of the 6 sides. So you can have 6 different textures on a block. So to demonstrate this, I will give this custom block 6 different textures. So, but actually, let's first start with all textures. So what all textures does is it allows you to change all 6 sides at the same time. So let's give this block a different texture. Let's use /OB edit, all texture, and now what we need to do is we need to look for the texture ID. As you can see, the game tells you to open up, to press F10 to see the terrain of PNG. Now, what this is, so we have our texture sheet again, and you can see a bunch of numbers, and these numbers are basically texture IDs. It's very important not to confuse texture IDs with block IDs. They're 2 very different things. Do not confuse them with one another, please. That is a very important thing. Alright, anyway, let's give this block a different texture. Let's say we want to change it to magma, right? So here we have our magma texture. As you can see, it has an ID of 86. If we say alt text 86, it will change all the textures to the magma. Let's move on to our next property. So let's edit, let's bring up our property list again. So we had all textures. Now let's move on to side texture. And what side texture does, it will modify the 4 side textures. So it'll leave the top and the bottom the same, but it will modify the side texture. So we're gonna bring up our command line again. So let's edit. This time we're gonna edit the side texture. And let's say we want to change the side texture to stone brick. So we have stone brick right here with an ID of 52. We're gonna enter in 52, and as you can see, it has retained, or it has kept the magma block texture on the top and the bottom, but it has changed the sides to stone brick. Alright, so we have side texture. Now we have left texture, right texture, front texture, and back texture. So this one might be a little bit more confusing, because how do you know what is the left side of a block, what is the front side of the block, what's the back side of the block? So what you can do is you can press F7, and what this will do is it'll bring up the axis lines. So since this is a 3-dimensional game, it has 3 dimensions: the X dimension, the Y dimension, the Z dimension. But just remember that the X, you can see here in chat as well, if you press F7, it'll give you this message. So the X is red, so the X is this line right here. You have the Y dimension, which is the height, and the Z dimension is this blue line. So the front side of a block is on the north side. So what is north? Just remember that the blue line always faces south. The blue line faces south, remember that. So if you know that the blue line faces south, you know that the opposite direction right here, this is north, right? So this is south, this is north. That would mean that, so this would be the south side of the block, right? Because the blue line faces south this way. This is the north side of the block, right? So this is north. So this is the front texture of the block. If we use OSLB edit 767 and we change front texture, right? So this one right here. Let's change it to sponge, for example. So we have sponge right here with an ID of 48. Press enter, it will change the front texture to sponge. All the other sides have been left untouched. It has just changed the front texture. So if we know that this is the front, if the front side is on the north, we know that the back texture has to be on the south side. So like I said, blue line faces south. This would be the south side of the block. So if we change the back texture, let's say we want to change it to obsidian. So this texture right here of an ID of 37. As you can see, it has changed it to obsidian. So our front texture is still sponge, our back texture is now obsidian, and all the other sides obviously have been left untouched. Okay, so we've covered the front texture, the back texture. Now for the right texture and the left texture. So is this the right side of the block, or is this the right side of the block? Just remember that the red line is the east side, and the right texture is on the east side of the block. So the red line always faces east. So the right texture is on the east side, which would be this side right here. So this is the right texture. So if we use OSLB edit, right texture, and let's change it to iron. So ID of 23. We have our iron on the right side of the block. And we have one more side to cover for this part, which is the left texture. So the left texture is always on the west side. So the red line faces east. So this is the west direction. And so on this block, this is the west side of the block. So we use OSLB edit. I'm going to change the left texture. So let's change it to crate. The crate texture right here. So I have an ID of 53. If I type in 53, as you can see, we have edited the left texture, and this block now has a different texture on each side. Well, almost. I still have to do the top texture and the bottom texture, but these ones are pretty easy to remember because, well, this would be the top of the block, that's the bottom. I think that's pretty obvious, right? So if we use, so get top texture, let's change it to sandstone 41, And let's change the bottom texture. So bottom text to, let's say, TNT 8. As you can see, we now have a different texture on each side of the block. So I hope that clears up the textures. Our next property are the minimum and the maximum values, and I think these ones are the most confusing, most difficult part of block creation process. So I hope I can clear this up once and for all. So let me explain what are minimum and maximum values. So basically any block in ClassiCube has so a standard block is 16 pixels, 16 pixels, 16 pixels tall. Technically I should be using the word units instead of pixels, because if you're using a higher resolution texture pack it might become a little bit more confusing, but it doesn't matter what kind of texture pack you're using. Any block in ClassiCube is always made out of 16 units, 6 by 16 units and 16 units tall. In the standard texture pack, the default texture pack, 1 unit corresponds to 1 pixel, so it's pretty convenient to visualize when I'm using the default texture pack, so I'm going to be working with that. But just remember, if you're using a higher resolution texture pack, that doesn't mean that your blocks will be made out of 32 units or something. Blocks are always made out of 16 units. By 16 units and 16 units tall. That's a standard block. A slab, on the other hand, is a little bit different, right? In this direction, which is, let's open up our press F7 again to get our axis lines, right? The red line is the x-axis, so a slab is also 16 units in the x direction. It is also 60 units in the, follow this blue line, the z direction, so this way. However, it is only 8 units tall in the y direction, which is our height. So with custom blocks you can make a bunch of different block shapes. This is also the maximum size a block can be. You can make blocks that are smaller than this, like this, but you can't make blocks that are bigger than the standard block. So keep that in mind. So what do the minimum and the maximum values have to do with this? So basically, the way that the game draws blocks is by connecting a minimum block coordinate value and a maximum block coordinate value. So what does that mean? So if I go to LB edit and I press minimum, the game will say enter the free minimum coordinates of the cube in units. As explained earlier, one block is 60 units. And the minimum block coordinates for a normal block are 0, 0, 0. So 0 on the x dimension, 0 on the y dimension, 0 on the z dimension. So one block here corresponds to 1 unit. So this would be 1 unit on a regular block, so that would correspond to this 1 block in this entire thing. So this represents 1 block ClassiCube, so to speak. Okay, so where would our minimum coordinates be for this entire block, right? So this is a block that's 16 units by 16 units that way and 16 units tall. Where would our minimum coordinates be? So let's start with the x dimension. The x is 0 in the most westernmost point of a block. So that would be across this line, right? So the red line, like I said earlier, faces east. So this would be west. So in our most westernmost point of the block, so this line right here, this is where x equals 0. Right, so if I grab a cobblestone to represent our minimum value, this isn't the correct spot for our minimum values yet, but it is the correct spot. This is a spot where x equals 0. If I place it here, this block is standing in x equals 1, x equals 2, 3, 4, and I think you're getting the idea. Okay, so we know that if I place it across along this entire line, all these blocks have an x coordinate of 0. And those are block coordinates, of course. Okay, now let's look at our y value. I think this one is the easiest one again because it's just the height, right? So a block is 60 units tall, so obviously this would be a y value of 0, this would be y value of 1, 2, 3, and then all the way up until y equals 16. Okay, so now for our z value. Our z value is this way, so this blue line, and our z value is 0 in the most northern point of the block. So if our blue line faces south, this would face north. This right here would be the most northernmost point of the block. So this is where the z value equals 0. Okay, so I've placed 2 cobblestones, but I want to place 1 cobblestone because there's only one spot where all 3 of those coordinates are 0. Okay, so if we know that our x value is 0 across this line, and we know that our y value is 0 when it's at the very bottom here, so this block has an x coordinate of 0, but it also has a y coordinate of 0 because it's at the very bottom. But it doesn't have a z value of 0 because, well, our z value, this is z equals 0, this is z equals 1, z equals 0, 1, 2, and z equals 3, right? So this block has a z value of 3, or z coordinate of 3, I should say. So I hope that you would agree that if I placed a cobblestone here, right, in the most bottom corner, right here, this block now has an x value of 0, right? Because our x is 0 in our most western point. Our y value is 0 because it's at the very bottom here. And our z value is also 0 because the z is 0 at the most northern point. So right here, right? Across this line, this is where z equals 0. So I should remove this one as well. So this point is the minimum coordinate, the minimum block coordinate. This is where the x value is 0, the y value is 0, and the z value is 0. Okay, so where is our maximum value? So let's bring up our command again. So it's pretty similar. Enter the pretty maximum coordinates. One block is 16 units, and the maximum coordinates for a normal block is 16 by 16 by 16. So it's pretty similar to our minimum value. So we're going to apply the same logic here, right? So we're trying to create a regular block that's 16 units by 16 units by 16 units. So we need to look for x equals 16, y equals 16, and z equals 16. Okay, if we know that, let's start with the x coordinate. Let's start with one dimension at a time. So we're starting with the x coordinate. The x coordinate is across the red line, like I said earlier. So let's to remember that the x coordinate, the x axis is across this red line, and our x value is 0 in the most westernmost point. So that would be right here. So this is where x equals 0, x equals 1, 2, 3. So we're looking for x equals 16. So obviously we have to go all the way over here, right? This line right here, this is where x equals 16. Okay, now for a y value. A y value is pretty easy, it's just a height, right? So this is where y equals 0. So obviously our y value would be 16 right here. Right across block, could place anywhere. Right? This block also has a y value of 16. Doesn't really matter for now. Okay, now let's look at our z coordinate. Our z coordinate, like I said earlier, is across the blue line. The blue line is the z axis, and the blue line also points towards south. So if this is south, then this is north. Our z coordinate is 0 in the most northern point. So right here, this is where z equals 0, this is z equals 1, z equals 2, and all the way over here across this line, z equals 16. So we're looking for the point where x equals 16 and y equals 16 and z equals 16. And the point where all of those values are 16 is none other than this point right here at the very top corner. So how does the game draw the block? So what the game does is I can actually do a pretty accurate visual representation of how the game draws the block. So what the game does, it will connect the minimum value with the maximum value. So if we use /Z and I press the minimum value and the maximum value, as you can see, this is how the game will draw the block. This is our final block shape, so to speak. So we now have made a 16 by 16 by 16 block, right? The maximum size of the block here. But let's say that we want to create a slab, right? How would we do that? What would the minimum and the maximum coordinates look like for a slab? Well, it's actually not as... If you understand what I have just explained, then I don't think any other block shape would be difficult to understand because it's the same exact concept. Okay, so our minimum value for a bottom slab, so this is a bottom slab, right? I'm not talking about a top slab, I'll get to that later. But for a bottom slab, all we would need to change is the maximum value because our minimum value is still the same. It still starts here, right? At this point right here. So if we look here, this is our minimum value. The block is present right here. So this minimum value is the same. We just need to change the maximum value because right, the slab isn't this tall. It isn't 16 units tall. It's only 8 units tall. So our maximum value would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It would be this tall. So if we connect our minimum value and our maximum value again, as you can see, we've got our slab. This is what a slab would look like. It's only half as tall as a regular block, so this is a correct representation of what a slab looks like. Let's turn our stone slab into an actual stone slab. Okay, so let's do what we just did. So OSLB edit. So it's 67 minimum. Well, our minimum is still the same. It's still 000, so we don't really have to enter that. It won't really change much. But our maximum value is different. So, like I said, it is still 16 units across the x-axis. It's still 60 pixels long in the x dimension. It's only half as tall, so it's only 8 units tall. And the z dimension is still the same, it's still 60 units in the z dimension, like I said. If we press enter, as you can see, we have just created our stone slab. For a top slab, we'd have to do the opposite. We would change the minimum value, but the maximum value would still be 16 by 16 by 16, because I think if I demonstrate it visually here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, this is where our minimum value would start. It would start here, and then this would be the maximum, right? If I hit Z and connect the minimum and the maximum, as you can see, we've just created a top slab. I think I made a 1 block too tall, I think I did. Okay, so if we connect our minimum and our maximum value, we've just created a top slab. So it started here, this is where our minimum value was, this is our maximum value. So our minimum value was at x equals 0, y equals 8, and z equals 0. And then our maximum value is at x equals 16, y equals 16, and z equals 16. I hope that makes sense. So let's turn this stone slab into a top slab instead. So we can use OSLB edit. We're going to change our minimum value to 0, 8, 0. Right, the block will look a bit weird now, but that's because we haven't entered our correct maximum value. So now we're going to enter the maximum value, and our maximum value is 16, 16, 16. And if we do that, we can see that we have just created a top slab. And using this logic, you can make sort of any kind of cube that you want. So I'm going to do a few more examples. Let's try and create a stair block. So a stair block. So you can't actually create the stair blocks that you have in vanilla. What you can do is, well, this does look like regular stair blocks, but these are actually regular cobblestone with these little bars right here, these cobblestone bars. And if you stack these on top of each other, you can sort of create a stair. So all you would have to do, I mean, we already have cobblestone, right? We don't have to create this, but we do have to create these little bars right here. And these bars are, they are 8 pixels or 8 units across this dimension. There are 16 units across the other dimension, and they are 8 units tall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy stone. So use OSLB copy 1, and we've just created a new stone block. I'm going to use OSLB edit 66 this time, right? Because this block has a new block ID. I'm going to use name. I'm going to name to stone stair. Right, so we still have our stone slab, and now we have our stone stair. And I want the stair to face this way, right? I could also make a stair that faces this way, but let's start by making it face this way. So in order to do that, let's make a visual representation of what that would look like. So what it would look like is so where would our minimum value be? If it faces this way, our minimum value would be here, and then if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? It would be 8, like I explained earlier, it would be 8 pixels in this dimension. It would be 16 pixels in this dimension, right? So our maximum value is, and it would be 8 pixels, 8 units tall, so 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is where our maximum value would be. So our minimum value is here, maximum value is there. Let's see what it would look like. And there we go. This is exactly how our stair block looks like. So let's enter it into this block. So OSLB edit. Our minimum, like I said, is still 0, 0, 0. I mean, I didn't do much because it was already 0, 0, 0. But our maximum value is different. Our maximum value is, so our x value is 16, right? It's 16 units in the x dimension. It is only 8 units tall. And for the z dimension, it is also only 8 units. So for presenter, as you can see, we have just created our little stair block, and if I grab regular stone, I can start building a staircase like this. Okay, so far so good, but what if I wanted to build it in the other direction? If I wanted to face this direction, we're going to need a new minimum and a maximum value. So our minimum value wouldn't be here, it would instead be here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then our maximum value would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I connect these two, we would get this. This is what it would look like. So it's slightly different. Okay, let's enter this into command form. So our minimum value would be, like I said, it would be right here. So this would be x equals 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So our minimum x value is 8. Our minimum y value is 0. And our minimum z value is also 0. So we're going to use, so we need to create a new block. So let's have the copy 1. Let's have the edit 765. Minimum. So like I said, our minimum x value would be 8, our minimum y value would be 0, and z value would also be 0. Okay, so there's a block so far, and our maximum value would be, let's see, our maximum value, so our x would be, so this is x equals 8, so this would be x equals 16, y equals 8, and z equals 16. Let's edit. Maximum x equals 16, y equals 8, z equals 16. And if we grab our block, as you can see, we have just created our other stair block facing in the eastern direction. Let's create our stair that faces towards the south. So we're going to copy block again. Let's copy 1. So if we're trying to create a stair that faces towards the south, what we need to do is our minimum value would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This would be our minimum value, and our maximum value would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 right here. So we're going to remove these blocks right here. So this would be x equals 0, y equals 0, and z equals 8. And this would be x equals 16, y equals 8, z equals 16. So this is the stair block that faces towards the south. We're going to go to this block. So this is our new block, 764. So let's edit 764 minimum. What did I say? Our minimum value is x equals 0, y equals 0, z equals 8. And our maximum value would be x equals 16, y equals 8, z equals 16. So if I put this down, as you can see, we've just created a stair block that faces towards the south. And this is how you create little stair blocks. And using the same logic, you can make any kinds of block, you know, like the little pebbles that I showed you, the little lamps that I showed you in the overmap as well. You can make pretty much anything. You just have to enter different minimum and maximum values, and you can just mess around with those, and I think you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly. Alright, so our next block property is the collision, which is listed as collide in our block properties list. So what is collision? Collision is nothing more than how you interact with a block. So a regular block like this, you can't walk through it. You can, well, you can walk on top of it, whatnot. But the collision of something like a sapling is different because you can walk through it. But then you have water, and you can walk through it as well. However, you go a little bit slower, and you can also swim in it. And then you have a rope, which is similar, but it is slightly different than water. You go slightly faster when you go through it and climb on it. It's also slightly different in that way. Then you have something like snow, which is completely walk through. Then you have fire, which is completely walk through, and then all of the flowers, the mushrooms are walk through. And then you have lava, which is similar to water, except you go even slower. So I guess you kind of get the idea of what collision is. So let's see what kind of options we have for any custom block that we're trying to create. So I'm going to actually turn this back into a regular block. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of the different options that we have for the collision. So if I type collide, as you can see, these are all the options we have. So if I enter a 0, this block will be completely walk through. So if I 0, as you can see, we can fully walk through the block and it won't really do anything in terms of stopping us from walking through it. If we enter a 1, we see that it will be climbable, just like a rope or like water. It's a bit of a middle ground between rope-like physics and water-like physics, or it feels a little bit like water, but it is a bit faster and it's a bit more slipperier than going through water. So yeah. And we have 2. This is the standard option for most blocks, which means you can't go through it. You can just walk on it, and it can act as a wall as well because it's solid. Our third option is, well, it's similar, but instead if you walk on top of it, so this option, it will basically act as ice. So our next option is, well, even slipperier ice. What do you know? You have regular ice, and you have even slipperier ice, and yes, definitely, which you can definitely tell the difference there. Then we've got 5, which is exactly the same as water. This is exactly the way that water behaves. And we have 6 is, well, lava, and we have 7, which is exactly like rope. So you have a lot of different options if you want to create climbable blocks, and you have a lot of different options in general for the collisions. So those are all the options you have for modifying a block in terms of how the player will interact with it. So let's look at our next property. So let's edit again, and our next option is the speed. So the speed is basically, it allows you to modify how fast the player will go when they walk on top of the block. So if I change the collision back to standard 2, and if I look here and enter speed, as you can see, we can enter a value between 0.25 and 3.96. So 0.25 is the absolute slowest you can make a block go. So if I 0.25, if I walk on top, as you can see, I will go really slowly. Your character's animation, walking animation, is also slowed down, which is a nice little detail there. You can tell we're going really slowly, but if I turn it into 3.96, as you can see, we go super quickly. And you can enter any value in between, so I can also make it 2, so we go slightly faster than standard. We can even make it 1.5, or even, I don't know how many decimals it will go to. There's one more thing that I want to mention, is that you can combine this with the collision. So let me create a little box here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the collision into, let's see, I'm going to turn it into air, and I've set the speed, I'm going to set the speed to 2, and as you can see, you don't necessarily have to walk on top of the block, as long as your character is interacting with the block. So if you go inside the block, you will also gain the speed boost. I could even remove the top layer, or I could remove the bottom. As you can see, my character will still get the speed boost from the stone block with the increased speed. Alright, so our next option was edit. Our next option is the sound, and the sound is, I think the sound is pretty obvious. You know, with stone, you know, every block has their own sound. Some blocks have the same sound, like stone, cobblestone, stone brick, all have the stone sound. So if you want to see all the different sounds, you just type in this command, and you can see these are all the options we have. So you have no sound, wood, gravel, grass, stone, metal, which is basically iron and gold. You have glass, cloth, which is basically all the sound that all the wool blocks have when you walk on top of them and break them. Sand and snow. So you have 9 or 10 different options here. So stone, like I said, has the standard stone sound. So I don't know if you can hear it, but when I walk on top of the stone block, it makes a stone sound. This also applies when placing or breaking the block. That will also make the same sound. So if I change it to, let's say, glass, it will now produce the glass sound when I walk on top of it, when I place and break it. Glass sound is notoriously notoriously loud when you break it, so I think you can hear that. Let's look at our next option, which is the Blockdraw. So the Blockdraw is another interesting property which you can combine with all the other ones as well. So what the Blockdraw does is it is basically purely a visual thing. So for example, a standard block like stone has the draw method set to opaque, but if I set it to, let's say, 1 or 2 or 3, it doesn't really change much. But if I change it to 4, what it'll do, it'll be completely invisible. The block is still there. So this is how you make invisible blocks. So now I'm trying to create an invisible wall, and then I will change, and at the end when I'm done with my map, I'll just use Blockdraw 4 and it'll become air. Well, it won't actually become air, it'll look like air. The game will draw the block as if it's air, but you will still interact with it depending on the collision, right? So you can combine this with the collision. So our collision is set to default, but if I use also be it collision, if I set it to water, so 5, you can swim through it as well. So you can create flying blocks like this. You can create what's your cool different things. You can create a sort of a flying effect like this. So players can fly, and you can even combine this with the speed. So if I set the 2, as you can see, we're going super quickly through these blocks. So there's a lot of creative things that you can do. You can combine all of these different block properties to create some really unique blocks. Okay, well, what does this mean? Transparent like glass, transparent like leaves, translucent like ice. So let me put in glass. Let's get ice, and let's get leaves. So these 3 blocks each have slightly different draw methods, because what these 3 blocks do have in common is they're all see-through. There is a slight difference between each one of these blocks. So if you look really closely in glass, you can see that you can't, so there is glass behind you, but you can't see the sides of these over glass blocks here. You can't see the bottom or the top rather of the block that you're looking through. So you can see the top of the over glass blocks, but you can't see the sides. That is the glass block draw method. With ice, you can't see any of that, right? If I place more ice, you cannot see. You can't see how many blocks of ice are behind it. Well, obviously the grass changed to dirt below here, but that's not what I'm talking about. You can't see the over ice blocks behind it. With leaves, it's a bit different. With leaves, you can't see the top, but you can see the bottom of the block right here. You can see the sides of the over leaf blocks as well. So there is a difference between the draw methods between these 3 blocks, albeit they are similar. But if you're trying to create certain types of blocks, it's something to keep in mind. There are some situations where you're trying to create blocks that are see-through and they look a bit weird. Just try messing around with the different draw methods of glass, which is 1, leaves, which is 2, and 3, which is ice. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So our next option is the fog density. What is the fog density? So the fog density only applies whenever you can walk inside of a block. So with solid blocks like this, the fog density doesn't matter. However, if I set the collision to either air or water or rope or whatever, so any collision allows me to walk through the block. So let's say airs, right? So I can walk through the block. Right now the fog density is in effect. Now since there is no fog density by default, as you can see, the world around me still looks the same. However, if I enter fog density, and then so the default is set to 0, but if I say like 200, as you can see, it becomes really dark, and I can decrease it as well. So you can create some really sort of cinematic looking areas as well. So this ties in really nicely to our next option, which is the Fogcolor, and it does exactly what you think it does. So if I enter Fogcolor, and now you have to enter a hex color. So how do you get the hex color? You can basically just Google it, or you can use Photoshop or Paint.net to. If you select a certain color, there should be a menu somewhere that allows you to see the hex color of the color you're trying to create. So if you want to create red or pink or blue or whatever, any color, you can enter it here. So let's say I want the fog to be white. So 1, 2, 3. So this would be F, and then I can reduce the fog density, let's say to 100 or 50. And as you can see, it'll look really foggy. I can even enter. I'm not really good with hex colors, so let's try this. Let's see what happens. So yeah, okay, so this is red. You can basically enter any color you want. Our next option is the fallback. So with the fallback, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really use this that often. So I think what this has to do with is that some players, so when you run ClassiCube, at least on the regular version of ClassiCube, I'm not sure about the Steam version, but with the standard free ClassiCube version, you can run it in enhanced mode, or I think the classic mode. So you have like 3 different options, I think, and if you're not running on the enhanced version, I think one of those options doesn't show custom blocks. So this will set the fallback block. So players who can't see your custom block will instead see the fallback block, and for that reason the fallback block can only be one of the standard blocks, because those are the only blocks that those players can see. So that is at least that's what I think what the fallback does. Again, I've never personally messed with this option, but I think that's a pretty good guess at what it does. So our last option is the order. So what the order does is you can basically, if you open up the block menu, so our block is by default, it's identical. Its positioning or inventory is identical to its block ID. So it's in position. So not only does it have a block ID of 767, it's also in position 767 in your inventory. But what I could also do is I could take this block and I could put it right next to stone brick on position 66. So what I could do is enter 66, and as you can see, it sets the order to 66. So it still has the same block ID, right? Still block ID, but it's in position 66 of inventory. And with this way, you can sort your inventory out in ClassiCube. I have personally never used this. Maybe I should have used it in the past, because this can actually be quite useful, so you can find your blocks more easily. So the last topic I want to discuss in this video are directional blocks. I will leave a link in the description for the original GitHub description that was made by the creator of the Megalovania service software. And what directional blocks allow you to do is something similar that is the case in Minecraft or in vanilla Minecraft. So if you have a stair block, it will be placed in the direction that you're facing. However, in ClassiCube, that is not the case by default. So remember these stair blocks from earlier in the video? Well, I can grab one of these, and if I place down this one that is facing north, if I try to place one that's facing any of the over directions, I can't just it won't automatically place the correct stair block depending on the direction I'm facing. What I would have to do is grab each of the different ones that are facing in the correct direction, and I have to manually pick them out. However, there is a way to make directional blocks in Minecraft Classic. If I want to make them directional, I have to already have created the 4 variants manually. But once you have done that, what you can do is give them specific names so that the game knows which variant is which. To make this directional, what I have to do is I'll be edit 066, and I have to change the name, and I'm going to name it to, instead of stone stair, I'm just going to shorten it to stair. And I'm going to use, so this syntax, you have to use a dash or a minus sign, and then you have to use capital letter N for north. You have to type it exactly. I accidentally took a screenshot, but you have to type a capital letter otherwise it won't work. You have to type in. So whatever you say, whatever the names before, doesn't really matter, as long as you have a minus sign and capital letter at the end. So N for north, we'll see the over directions later. So stair N, and as you can see, it is now named stair N. Since it's the only directional block so far, it doesn't work yet because I have to do all the over directions first. So let's move on to the east. So this one is east with an ID of 765. This is the block that faces east. So if I need to edit this one, so let's edit name, stair east. I also want to mention that for each group of blocks that you want to be directional, so these 4 stair blocks have to have the same exact name. Right? So it doesn't really matter which name, as long as the name is the same for all 4 of these blocks, except for the syntax at the end. Right? So this is the east variant. So if I now do this, this is when I face north and face east, the game will now place the east version of the stair block. As you can see, it's already starting to take place. I just have to do the over 2 directions. So we have our south blocks. So I think you're getting the idea. So S stands for south, and we have to do the west blocks. So 763 west, and as you can see now, we have all of our directional stair blocks. But there are more variants than this. So the next variant of directional blocks are corner blocks. So what you can do, you can also place blocks that are in a northwest corner, or a northwest corner, northeast corner, southeast and southwest corners. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sort of pole blocks, right? So like corner blocks, fence-like blocks, little pillars basically. So I'm going to go back to the minimum and the maximum thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to list up a couple more. What I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a few more examples as well for the minimum and the maximum value. So if I want to create a sort of pillar, small pillar block, right? I'm going to create a northwest version first. So what I'm going to do, I'll be at 762. And our minimum is still 0, 0, 0, but our maximum is going to be 8. Our maximum Y value is going to be 16, and our maximum Z value is going to be 8. As you can see, we have just created a little pillar block that's facing a northwest. I'm going to copy again, I'll be copy 1. We're going to have our new block here, and this one's going to be facing northeast, so let's copy edit. 1. Our minimum is different this time, so X is 8, our Y is 0, and our Z is 0, and our maximum X will be 16, 16 by 8. This is our northeast, so we copy 1. We're going to place the block down here. Our minimum X value is 0, minimum Y is 0 as well, but our minimum Z is 8, and our maximum X would be 8, 16, 16. And our last version is the southeast, so let's edit 5, 9. Our minimum would be 8, 0, 8, and that's it. Okay. So now we have 4 different variants, but again, since they don't have the directional names yet, the game doesn't know which one. It isn't a directional block yet, so we have to change the names accordingly. So since this is the north-west version, what you would do is, let's simply edit. I'm going to name it pillar northwest. Northwest. So get name pillar northeast. I'm going to name this one southwest, and this one is going to be named southeast. And if I now place them, as you can see, they are directional. So if I place them like this, there we go. I could even place them like this. As you can see, they are completely directional right now, and so yeah, that works just fine. Okay, so our next variant is our top slab and bottom slab. You can make those directional as well. So we created a top slab earlier, but it seems like I have gotten rid of that one. So I'm going to just recreate it real quick. So it's 7, maximum 16, 8, 16. So we've got our regular slab. I'm going to use, let's copy one again. We've got our block here, so we edit 758, minimum 080, and our maximum 16. As you can see, we have our bottom slab and our top slab. However, again, by default, these are not directional. So if I try to make a top slab, it doesn't work. Even though I have one here, it already exists. It's not directional. So for the names, what you have to do is let's edit 7, name, and then I'm going to use stone slab down. You have to do, so you type minus sign, capital letter D, which stands for down, which means down slab in this case. So now it's a down slab, and for this one, stone slab, make sure the name is consistent across these two blocks. Right, so they're both called stone slab, but this one, this one with a minus sign and then capital letter U, which stands for up. Top slab in this case. So now, as you can see, they are directional. So I can just whichever. So if I'm pointing at the lower half of the block, it will place a down slab. If I'm looking at the top half of the block, it will place a top slab. So now you can create like something like a staircase. If I place down blocks here, I just grab either one of these blocks and then I can just create a staircase. It's as easy as that with these directional blocks. So they're very useful like that. Okay, so the last part of the directional blocks, there is one more variant that I am going to discuss, and those are fence-like blocks. So I'm going to create really quickly a fence. So I'm going to copy, let's copy a different block this time to switch it up. So let's copy log. So let's copy 17. I'm going to create a sort of wooden-like fence. So I'm going to use, so let's help me edit 757. So this is going to be a little more difficult, so I'm going to make this fence that actually changed it to be 4 pixels wide. So I changed the minimum to 006 and the maximum to 16, 16, 10. So this will create a sort of a thin looking fence like this. And I'm going to create the over variant, which is facing overload. So I'm going to copy the log again, so we copy 17. So we created another custom block right here. And this time, the minimum is going to be 600, and our maximum is going to be 10, 16, 16, and this is the over variance right here. So how do you make these directional? So what you have to do is you have to get the first one, edit the name, so I'm going to name it fence, and now you have to, so there's two variants for this. So if I open up my menu here, we have a west-east variant, and you have a north-south variant. So this one is obviously facing from west to east, so I'm going to name this one fence, and then minus sign west east capital letters. Name. I don't know why I forget that. For this one is north south, so I'll be edit 7, 6, and this one is north south. Capital N, capital S, minus sign in front, and make sure the name is the same for both of these blocks. So this is how you create the over variant, and whenever I place them down now, they are directional, as you can see. So if I place it like this, if I face this way, it'll place the over variant. So there is a bit of an extension on this version, on the west-east and north-south variant. For the very last topic of this tutorial, I am going to go over the last variant of the directional blocks. So there's one more thing I have to cover. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I'll be copy 5 in this case, and I am going to create little bars. So our X starts at 0, our Y value starts at 6, and our Z value also starts at 6. Our maximum is 16, here is our first fence, or little pillar. I'm going to also copy 5 again. I'm going to create the over variant, and it's 754. Our minimum X is going to be 6. Our minimum Y is also going to be 6, and our minimum ZY is going to be 0. Our maximum is going to be 10 by 10 by 16. This is the over variant. Okay, so I'm going to create one more variant because this is going to be the difference maker. So we're going to copy 5, and this one's going to stand up straight, just like the over pillars. So here's what's like this: 753, and our minimum X is going to be 6, minimum Y 0, 6. 10 by 16 by 10, and there we go. Here we have our fence that is standing upright. So we have 3 different variants. So how do we make these? So how do we make these 3 directional? Okay, so this one is still facing from west to east. This one's still facing from north to south. So what I'm going to do is go to these. So edit name, and I'm going to give them a different name. So I'm going to pull west east. I'm going to name this one pull north south. Name north south, and I'm going to name this one. Oh, this is the different one. Name pull up down. So U D capital letters again with a minus sign for the syntax. Name, and now they're directional. So as you can see, if I place them from the top, I'll place this one. Well, if I place it like this, but if I want to place the over variance, I'll have to place it against another block, right? Like this. So if I place it from the ground like this, it will look like that. But if I place it down like this, I'll place the over variance. Same on this side. Place this one like that. So that's it. That's all I had to cover. I've covered every single block property, including directional blocks. So I really hope that that clears it up a little bit. I've tried to explain the minimum and the maximum values as best as I could. I know it is confusing. I know it is a bit difficult at the beginning, but I highly recommend, if you still don't understand it, you can re-watch the part and try to see if you'll understand it then. And if you still don't fully understand it, what I would recommend is just go in game and just mess around with it, because there is logic behind it and you will understand it eventually, and it'll make sense, trust me. It's not as difficult as it looks at first, so just keep that in mind. And once you understand it, you can make some really fun things. You can make some really creative maps, and custom blocks are a great thing. They're a great addition to this game, and the full potential of custom blocks has not been reached yet. I think there's so many different possibilities that we don't even know yet, and I'm excited to see what people will make in the future. So if you did find this tutorial helpful, please leave a like. It's just it'll make me happy, and leave a comment, and maybe subscribe. You don't have to, but anyway, thank you for watching, and have a nice day.